Assalamu alaikum everybody, and a very warm welcome back to another episode of Arabic Text Time. Let's get into it. So in today's episode, actually, we've got something really special because we're doing a little passage from a text which is perhaps the most well-known travel writing in all Arab history, really. Like there is a long history of travel writings among Arabs. It's interesting. I remember in Cornwall, growing up in Cornwall, I remember one of my summer jobs was I used to do gardening and cut someone's grass. And there were very, very wealthy people that go down on holiday there and stuff. And I remember this lady telling me, like, because I was telling her about me studying Arabic and everything like that. She was like, oh, you should do something for Arab tourists coming here, because Arabs have started traveling more these days, haven't they? I was thinking to myself, have you never heard of Ibn Batutah? Have you never heard of Ibn Jubayr? Have you never heard of Ibn Fadlan? This guy was traveling 1,000 years ago. I thought it was kind of amusing that there's a perspective that Arabs have only just discovered travelling recently. But maybe she was just ignorant, and we're all ignorant about some stuff. So let's not hate on the lady who was paying me to cut her grass. I digress. So as I mentioned, this is a little passage from Ibn Batutah's rihlah. Ibn Batutah is he's living in like the 1300s. I think he's born in like 1309 or 08 or something. I get mixed up between like the Hijri and the Common Era calendar, but I think it's about 1308 and dies in like 13 something, 60 something, I think it is. I think he lives to be about 60 years old. Yes, and he travels really extensively, like way further than what Ibn Fadlan does or Ibn Jubayr does. I mean, his rihlah is much thicker as well. When you buy it, it's about this big, but Ibn Jubayr's is about that big. And because he travels like as far as like Malaysia and China and stuff, he travels like around like the whole Muslim world. And he is from Tangiers in northern Morocco. And and one place where he travels to that we're going to look at today is actually Somalia, which is really interesting. Interestingly, we don't actually see the word Somali in there at all. We don't see that word in there. We see another term that's used for sort of the Horn of Africa. So let's actually have a look at it. So this, I'll put the text up, inshallah, so you guys can see it. So the chapter that this is under, there's actually a few pages about it, because I believe he arrives in a place called Zayla, which Zayla still exists, actually. It's a port in what is modern-day Somaliland. At the very, very top, though, by the way. Like, if you're coming from Arabia, that is where you would arrive in if you're coming by sea. So he arrives in Zayla, but we're going to talk about him in Mogadishu, which is obviously, the capital of Somalia now. And it actually was called Mogadishu back then. Now, that's not a new name. Mogadishu is an incredibly old name. There's there are many linguists, like many articles by linguists that I've read that actually argue that Somali is an older language than Arabic, which is really interesting. But anyway, so let's have a look at what is said. So the chapter of this, the title of it, is Dhikr Sultani Mogadishu. So when he says dhikr, we obviously as Muslims, we know the term dhikr to mean like remembering Allah, like mentioning Allah. And that really is the same word here. It's like the mention of the Sultan of Mogadishu. The mentioning or the remembering of, a chapter which mentions the Sultan of Mogadishu. So what do we have? وَسُلْطَانُ مَقْدِيشُ كما ذكرناه إنه يقولون له الشيخ. Okay, so there's a reference to a little conversation that's before this passage actually. So what's actually being said? So, and the Sultan of Mogadishu, كما ذكرناه, as we mentioned him. The verb ذكر means to mention. ذكرنا, we mentioned who. So كما is like what we mentioned him, or as we mentioned him. إنما, that certainly يقولون له, that they say to him a sheikh. They say of him that he's a sheikh. There's actually a conversation at the end of the last paragraph before this passage between Ibn Batutah and a qadi and a judge who sort of I don't know. He's a judge that serves the sultanate of this sultan. Who says that we call him a sheikh. That's what we call him. Like, we don't call him Amir. We don't call him Al-Malik. We don't call him king. We don't call him a commander. We call him a sheikh. That's what we call him. Good. Wasmuhu, and his name is Abu Bakr ibn Sheikh Omar. That's his name. Okay. His name is Abu Bakr ibn Sheikh Omar. So his name is Abu Bakr ibn Sheikh Omar. That's his name. Good, that's what we refer to him as. I believe you can actually look that person up. Like I think that particular individual is actually known to have been a ruling sheikh or a sultan actually in the Horn of Africa at this time. Yeah, so I mean this I don't know. I've been entirely guessing. Like I guess I think the accounts and his rihlah itself I think actually says that he was 22 years old in the Hijri calendar when he actually started his journey. This is like, I don't know how far this is in. I would suggest he's in his late 20s or something when he's writing this. So let's say it's in the common era of like, you know, I don't know, 1335, something like that. If you were to look it up, like who was the sultan in Mogadishu in like 1335, you'd probably find a name aligning with this guy. So what do we learn about him? Okay, so what does Ibn Batutah say about this sheikh? He says, وَهُوَ الْأَصْلُ مِنَ الْبَرْبَرَةِ. Okay, so, and he is in his origin. He is originally, asl. If you say the asl, you mean the origin. You can even use it when you're talking about where you're from originally. Like sometimes you might say, now I remember when I was in Palestine with a brother, he's originally from Bangladesh, right? And he looks Bangladeshi. Although he often got asked if he was Saudi. I don't know if you guys can explain that, but anyway, he's Bangladeshi, he looks Bangladeshi. And but in Palestine, you know, people would ask him, you know, min ayna anta, or more likely, ant min wayn, is probably what people say to him in Palestine. And they'd say, you know, in Britannia, he'd say England. And they'd ask him aslan, like originally, you know. Originally aslan, you know, you'd say, ana aslan min Britannia, ana aslan Inglesi, I'm originally English, you know. Yeah, but he would say Aslan min Bangladesh. Cool, but he is in origin min al-Barbara. We, like here in the Western world, we know the Berbers to be North Africans, right? Like, but which is kind of interesting because Ibn Battuta himself is a North African, right? Like he doesn't seem to resonate the term Berber with being North African. He doesn't refer to himself as being a Berber. Right? I don't know if he's an Arab or if he's a Berber. I actually don't know, but there's an Arabic term for what we call Berbers, which is Amazighi. And I don't know if the Amazighis called themselves Amazighis, but they knew the people of the Horn of Africa to be al-Barbara, which is kind of interesting. So I know al-Barbara is like a Middle Ages Arabic term for people of the Horn of Africa. But the term Barbara itself doesn't come from Arabic, though. I think it comes from Greek originally, and because I think it was even used by Romans as people who don't speak Greek, I think, and that's how it ended up being used for the Amazighi people of North Africa. But I think it's also used for other groups of people that the Romans dealt with who didn't speak Greek, right? I think it also was applied to, like, I don't know, Germanic tribes or whoever was in England at the time who weren't speaking Greek. I think the term Barbara was used for those as well, but I digress a little bit. But in this case, al-Barbara, he's saying he's originally from the Horn of Africa, right? He's not saying that he's an Arab who settled there. He's not saying that he's from somewhere else and settled there. He's saying that he's originally someone from the Horn of Africa. Good. And then he tells us about what language he speaks, which is really interesting. So he says, وَكَلَامُهُ, and his speech is bil-Maqdishi. So he says bil-Maqdishi, just from having read, he means what we today would call Somali, right? And particularly probably the Banadir dialect of Somali. Yeah, but he's calling it Mogadishi. That's what he's referring. He's calling it Mogadishan, right? That's what he's referring to it as. But it's what nowadays we would know as Somali. Good. And also, يعرف اللسان العربية, and he also knows the tongue of Arabic. It reminded me of something quite nice actually here, because I sometimes police my students on when they use the term Arabic and they're talking about the language, to use it in the feminine, to use it with a ta marbuta on the end. Because you usually do that, because when you say that you speak al-Arabiyya with a ta marbuta on the end, you're actually describing the lugha. You actually mean al-lughatul arabiyyatu, right? Like you're describing the lugha, which is why you usually use a ta marbuta on the end. But why can't you be describing a lisan, right? Why can't you be describing the tongue rather than the language, right? Like, because the lisan isn't feminine. If you're describing the tongue, as Ibn Batutah is in this case, you'd use it in the masculine. So I would like to apologise to all the students who I've told off over the years for who I've policed rather. I wouldn't mark it as wrong, but you know, I have policed students in lessons perhaps in the past, or I've suggested that it's nicer to use the feminine. And also I think there's a little bit of like in Arabic, because there's kind of a distinction between like Ammi and Fusha, sometimes something might be correct in Fusha, but because it's used in Aramiya, another option seems more fasih, like seems more eloquent. You know, that's very common, you know. No, that is the case. Sometimes something is used in Aramiya, which is perfectly fine. Like if you're to use it in Fusha, it is perfectly fine, right? But because it's so used in Aramiya, if there's an alternative which is not used in Aramiya, then that will be the one that's seen as more eloquent. Like a big example is using the verb takallama, meaning to speak. Like in the dictionaries of Arabic, you can say, if you want to speak about something, you can say takallama ala or takallama an. Right, an means about and ala means upon. So in Arabic you can say speak upon something or speak about something, right? But because in Aramiya they almost always use takallama ala to takallama an, it seems a bit more eloquent to say takallama ala. Right? Like even though they're both, like if you were to look up in the Hansveld dictionary or something, my prediction, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my prediction would be that with takallama they would suggest ala or an. You could use either. But in my experience, certainly Puritans who want you to sound as to the book as possible, they will encourage you to say takallama ala. But if you use the verb tahaddatha, which pretty much means the same thing, tahaddatha an, they will encourage that. So that kind of, you know, that kind of arrangement in Arabic isn't uncommon. But anyway, that's everything that we're going to do. Just a couple of lines for this particular one, because I think we learn a lot and we get a bit of an insight into some history of Arabic literature. I will link up as well a PDF version of the whole rihlah of Ibn Batutah, which you can go ahead and download. And this is page 80, by the way. So we're reading from page 80 in that rihlah. So I'll link that up in the description as well. Last thing perhaps I'll say, as I don't think I mentioned it at the beginning, is that as usual I'll give a big shout out to all the people who support on Patreon. That means the world to me. So if any of you guys want to kind of get closer to my work and what I do, get more resources and more time with me and stuff personally, then go and check out the Patreon, inshallah. It'll be patreon.com/Sam Martin Burr, and that's everything for this video. If you liked it, and I really hope you did, please don't forget to like and share it. And also don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because that really helps to support the project as well. So that's it for now. See you guys next week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.